Okay.
Yeah.
So everybody see my screen now?
Yep.
So I'm in a group on Facebook that is a small and micro layout group. And it has membership from all over the world, Australia, Europe, uh, US, all over. And I've always found a lot of inspiration from the smaller layouts, particularly that European folks make. They have a different mindset than we do when it comes to building layouts. And somebody proposed a challenge to build a layout in a football display case. And the inside of the case measures 13 inches by 9 inches. And a gentleman in the group came up with this track plan. And there were two of us in the group that took up the challenge. And I was enamored with the challenge behind it. And so I couldn't resist. So I was left without adult supervision one day in Hobby Lobby and came home with a football display case. And things went downhill from there. So this shows the track plan. And then the designer, his name's Rob, his vision of it was a quarry, and called it the Marble Mountain Quarry Company. So I've stuck with that theme. And let's see. Just have to click it to make it advance. So this shows the track plan inside the case that I bought. Some of these statistics might make you groan. Number 2, turnouts, 6-inch radius curves. This is HON30, by the way. The turntable is just 4 inches in diameter. Obviously, no one makes a number 2 turnout, so everything was hand laid. There are no jigs available for such turnouts, so I had to use the track plan itself as the template and make religious use of gauges, and just really be careful. This is my first foray into really hand laying track without a jig, so this was a new experience, and kind of expanded my boundaries a little bit. And I decided to go with HO Code 70 rail, which seemed to make sense. I was afraid N-scale rail might be too small. So that's what I went with. And so with everything being hand laid, here it shows using the diagram as the template itself. Everything was built in place. I used double face tape to hold the PC board ties in place as I was laying the rail. And used a small machinist device that I picked up through Micromark. Ordered it through Scale, but it came from Micromark, and that turned out to be really handy. Just to have something that would hold the rail in place while I filed the angles for the points and frogs and whatnot. And it all worked out. And I had to have a base to put it on, so given the small confines and knowing that I was going to have the mechanics for a turntable and some switch throws, I just decided to make a box for the base using 1/8 inch craft plywood. And I couldn't make it too deep because there is a vertical measurement involved in the display case. So I couldn't let it get too tall, otherwise it would interfere with the backdrop and buildings and whatnot. So it's about 2 inches deep. And where the harbor is, it's probably about a 1/2 inch, I believe. And as you can see there, where it's cut away for the harbor in the lower right corner, there's a little lip there, and that's to hold the water when I pour it, the Woodland Scenics water. But this kind of gives you an idea of the base. And for turnout controls, on my N-scale layout, I love the Blue Point controls. Those, I think they're great. They work fantastically, but they're too tall for this type of application. So I went with a homebrew sort of turnout control using double pole, double throw slide switches, RC rods, and just some piano wire. So there's basically, I don't know if you can see it or not, on the switch that's laying there on the mat by itself, there are 2 holes drilled. The larger one's for the clevis on the RC rod, and then the smaller one is for the piano wire, which actually engages the throw bar on the turnout. And so it provides a mechanical throw and the electrical connection to change the polarity on the frogs, so the frogs can be powered. And these are dirt cheap to make and easy to make, and they work well. The turntable was going to be another fun adventure. And some of the discussions in the group on Facebook, the suggestion came up of using an audio plug as the pivot point for the turntable, because it provides a nice mechanical pivot, but it also provides a electrical conduit to provide power to the track on the turntable itself. So that's what I went with. And if you think about it longer than a couple seconds, though, you'll realize that every 180 degrees, the polarity is going to be off, and you're going to have a short circuit situation with the rest of the layout. And so the way I came up with that, I'll actually show that on the next page, but you can see part of it. The wooden block on the photo on the right is a cam, and you can see the rollers of the switch down in the opening there. It's a cam that operates a pair of micro roller switches. In every 180 degrees, it flips the polarity on the turntable. So that way it's idiot proof. And since I'm the primary operator of this little layout, that's a pretty important feature to have. And I like to tell people that the turntable is digitally operated and optically indexed. So that means you use your fingers to turn it and you eyeball it to make sure the track's aligned. And this shows how the switch on the left is it's positioned, it's not fastened in place yet, but on the right it shows the whole mechanism. So there's a bracket there to hold the bottom part of the audio plug, and then you can see the switches mounted and how they engage the cam. You can see the edge of the cam under the wooden block there, and everything wired up. And it doesn't matter which direction the turntable rolls, it'll engage the switch, the cam will engage the switch, and it will flip the polarity as necessary. And now the fun part, start working on scenery. The harbor retaining wall, it's an item I found on eBay. It's actually a hydrocal plaster piece, and I was able to cut it down to fit and painted it using, started out with like a burnt umber color, and then dry brushed various shades of gray over top of that to get the worn and weathered look. The dock is scratch built. The pilings are just dowel rod, and use small strips of wood on the top. There's 2 layers, so the track goes down, and then I put 2 layers of strip over top of that, one that's even with the ties, and then the other one overlaps the ties, so that basically the rail is kind of embedded in the surface of the dock. And the turntable is concealed by a large building, so that's and I had used photo editing. Basically, I used foam core as the base, and then laminated paper over top of that, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And also inside the turntable area, I painted all of that black. It's kind of a theatrical thing. It's off scene, and it keeps it dark so you don't see too much of what's going on in there, in theory. And so here's how I approached the buildings. The photo on the left is one that I found on a website called textures.com. And if you like using photo editing software, this is a great site to use. They have photos of all kinds of different textures, as the URL would imply. And I've used everything from photos of asphalt roads taken from above, so you can see all the detail and the cracks there. There's bricks, different types of wood siding, and so on. Just about anything you would need that they'll have. And I found that this photo, and this is the actual photo on the left. From that, I use a photo editing program called GIMP. It's a free to download, free to use package. There's lots of online tutorials and online help, and it is really powerful. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. And I used it to make the 2 buildings you see on the right. Just basically cutting and pasting segments of the original building and creating an entirely new building on for the large one, and then raising the original building up to get the door up to a loading dock height. And of course, there's a backdrop. The backdrop is what separates the two scenes. Having two scenes on such a small layout might seem like a crazy idea, but it works and it really makes the layout function. So now we have two distinct scenes. And the turntable is what allows the movement between the two scenes. And it also acts as a runaround track. Because if you follow the track plan, the locomotive has to get on the other end of the train or the car, as it may be, to operate on the two different scenes. And so the end of the building has a large opening. This is how you get access to the turntable, since there's a big building hiding it. And that opening is big enough to get a hand in, enough to rotate the turntable and eyeball the alignment with the other tracks. And you can see that you get the idea that the backdrop slices the building in two, basically. So there's part of the building's visible on one half and the other on the other half of the layout. And then the little brown hoist crane is one. It's a kit I found, and I drew a little inspiration from Joe Fields on this one. This is an old Alexander scale models kit. I don't know how old it was. I think the kit is older than I am, based on some of the information that was on the paper, that the instructions that came with it. But the cross braces on the crane are made from very thin cardstock that came in the kit, and you had to slice them very carefully to size, and they were very flimsy. And I remember Joe talking about using super glue to add some rigidity to the cardstock he uses on his models. So I did that on this model, and it worked out great. It was about the equivalent of working with styrene after I did that, and it made putting the model together a lot easier, I think. So thanks, Joe, for that tip. And of course, everyone knows once you start putting green stuff down, it seems like progress goes at light speed. That's the biggest transformation, I think, of a layout, is when you start putting the grass down. And I used 4mm Silphor static grass on this, and I blend a couple of different colors to get the shade I like. So you see that on the front half of the layout, or the harbor side, I call it, at the front. And then on the raw material side, I actually, if you look, there's a little bit of contour there. It's not just flat plywood. So I added just some little pieces of styrofoam that were kind of sculpted and shaped to blend in with the surrounding area. That also gave me a place to mount the trees. So it's, little cheat to get the trees mounted. But it worked out, and it also gives it a little contour and a little bit different geography from the other half of the layout. And one little trick I did, so the turnout controls, originally I thought I was going to have them come out through the fascia, but that wasn't going to work because the base is basically just small enough to clear the cover for the case. So that wasn't going to work. In recessing them, that was going to get to be too much of an undertaking, I think. So I went ahead and bent the rods up, the RC control rods, for the turnouts, and had them come out through the tabletop. But to hide them, in this case, I used a barrel near the crane, and for the second turnout, I used a stick from the backyard to look like a tree stump. And on the harbor side, there's one turnout, and I used a barrel for it too. So they're right there. The turnout controls are in plain sight, but they don't look like turnout controls. They're disguised. And of course, for rolling stock, a 4-inch turntable, HO N30 layout, I'm going to need some really short rolling stock. And no one makes rolling stock as short as what I needed. Works out to be about 12 feet. Basically, the car and each of the car and the locomotive can't be over 2 inches. So I started out with a resin kit, had 2 cars in it, and you can see in the top left photo where I carved up the car side to get it down to 12 feet, and glued them back together on the top right, and then you can see the 2 cars that I ended up with once I was done. And then I also wanted to have a couple of flat cars since it's a quarry and they're moving big chunks of rock or limestone. And the issue with a flat car made out of styrene is that it weighs about as much as a feather. And in scale, I had made some Pennsylvania Railroad F-22 flat cars, which it's a 30-foot flat car. And in scale, that's pretty light. And I didn't necessarily want to rely on a load to provide the weight. So what I came up with then and what I used on this was to make a master and create a mold and then make castings of the car using a mixture of tungsten powder and resin. And that works out pretty good. There's a breakover spot where if you use too much tungsten powder, it weakens the resin. So you have to kind of trial and error experiment and figure out where that sweet spot is. And I ended up with 2 cars. They weighed just shy of a ½ ounce on their own. And that's enough for this layout. And I just put a wood deck on it, painted everything, put the wood deck on, and I'm off to the races. And for control, this layout actually operates. So without getting too carried away with power and control, I've dabbled in Z-scale, and part of that was purchasing this little 9-volt battery operated pulse width modulated controller. And the thing is great. It really gives you nice control of the locomotive. And given how small the locomotives are for this layout, the 9-volt battery provides plenty of power for the locomotive on this layout. So I added an audio plug connector on the end and put one on the controller itself. So I can just plug it in and go. And this is the fun part. This is the complete layout. All the scenery is basically done. The rock or for the quarry material, I just cut up little pieces of styrofoam and painted it with some very light gray craft paint. As you can see, the water's been poured in the harbor, and got freight and whatnot there on the dock. And the very leftmost barrel in the photo, that's the disguised turnout control for the turnout. It kind of blends in rather nicely, I think. And there's a close-up of the harbor. Guys getting ready to unload the flat car to put the material on a boat. And there's one of the box cars parked in front of the loading dock door. And there's the raw material side of the layout. So you can see how the back side of the building is spliced by the backdrop, and the trees give it a little different feel. And there's the crane in place that I had built and getting ready to get some blocks loaded onto the flat car. And there's another view of one of the box cars. And that door there, by the way, too, that came from textures.com. So that was a separate photograph, and I added it there to create a loading dock door. And there's a close-up of the brown hoist crane. There's a top-down view, so that gives you a view of the completed layout from a bird's eye level, so you can kind of see how everything fits together. And there it is inside the case. And that's it. That's my presentation.
Wow.
Awesome.
That is phenomenal, Chris.
Thanks.
I was there when before you had all this put together to this level. Wow.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
This is Steve. How'd you make your limestone blocks?
It's just the styrofoam, the insulation type styrofoam. I don't know. It's not the kind that it's like the little white balls. It's just the straight pink styrofoam. I just cut it up in 1/4-inch strips and then cut it down and then paint it with craft paint.
Yeah, I've got, I don't know, 4 or 5 40-foot gondolas. Some of them I think most of them are in Monin. And I wanted to put big limestone blocks in them, that would typically have been shipped out of Bedford.
Right. Yeah. So the perfect load.
But I thought about casting them out of plaster, and I've never actually sit down and tried to do anything. So I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah, just use an X-Acto knife and a straight edge and cut it out of the styrofoam. And you don't want the cuts necessarily to be perfect because the limestone's going to be chipped up a little bit too. And so all I did was cut them up like that and paint it with some light gray craft paint, very light gray, and that's all I did to it.
Chris, there's a question in chat from Alan. It says, "Brilliant. How long did it take you to complete it?"
Thank you first, and then. Fred, you've been following this on Facebook. How many months have I been working on this? I want to say, I think I started on this when I was still in my sling from rotator cuff surgery. So that's probably
that was the impetus, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Give me something to do to keep me sane while I was laid up. Probably the very beginning of February, I would guess. Late January, early February, and I'm just now. The cars I just finished probably within the last week or two.
Yeah.
So it gives you a timeline.
Yeah, and a note to everybody on the call here. It was really neat to follow the progress on Facebook. So what you got in 15, 20 minutes here, I got over a period of 2 months. But it was really neat seeing all this stuff and the discussion going back and forth as well.
Well, I think this explained a lot of what we saw on Facebook that I didn't quite sometimes figure out. But, I got to know what Chris's next project is because I need more stuff for the Packard.
I can tell you what it is. I need a locomotive for this, and I tried one of the mini trains. It's a European locomotive, but I didn't really want to cut it up. I don't know. It's a great locomotive. It runs great. I just wasn't wowed for it for this application. But what I found is a 3D printed 23-ton GE box cab, and it fits on a Bachmann ON30 Rusty from Thomas the Tank Engine. That's the donor mechanism. So I have it all mounted up. So I'm going to build a little enclosure to do some. It's an air eraser. So if you think of like an airbrush size sandblaster with 400 grit media, I'm going to use that to sand some of the detail areas that I can't get with a sanding stick, and get that painted up. And that's my next project, and that'll be the motive power for the layout.
Cool.
Chris? Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Great work as always. Pretty darn neat stuff. I hate you. But then you were gonna just a couple of questions. Do you actually move like the stump in the 55-gallon drum, or do you take it off and move the mechanism?
They are fastened in place. So yeah, you actually move the stump. And,
okay, neato. And you answered my question about you had how this is powered, but I didn't. I was going to ask you, what are you going to power it with? So now I know that. So
yeah,
marvelous as always. Great stuff.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right, any other questions for Chris? Doesn't sound like it. All right, Chris.
If I may, real quick.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things in this layout, in the construction of this layout, that I learned from some of the guys that are part of this meeting. Scratch building cars. Mark Norman, I sat through his clinic, and that's what got me started scratch building cars. So I got to apply that here.
Thank you.
As I already mentioned, Joe Fields and the tip with using the super glue on the cross braces, the cardstock cross braces on the crane. That was
say that 3 times quick, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just different things. So it's fun to be able to look back and recognize where you pick up different things, where you learned it from, and who has influenced you in the hobby. And so, this is this is how we all grow in the hobby, and how we all help each other. And that's the thing I love about this hobby. It really is it's a community effort. So, and we all gain from it. So thank you guys.
Yeah. And you know, when I was in Fred's shoes, I tried to, you know, promote every now and then this exact thing. If you come to meetings, you know, when you can attend clinics and so on like that, you even coming to open houses when, you know, we can have those back again is just you know, the little things you pick up. Same thing, you know, coming into your house, it's like, I really like that. I think I'll give it a try or see if I can incorporate it. And I hope that more, and I know Fred certainly, when the opportunity presents itself, you know, tries to promote the same thing. So I hope more, you know, when this is available or some of these that, you know, more guys will watch it and hopefully pick up something.
All righty, thank you, Chris. If you'll unshare your screen.